Welcome to Doors to Hope and Healing, an inside look at the many facets of work that is happening at the Department of Children and Families, between our staff, the families we serve, and our community partners. My name is Jacqueline Ford. I have had the honor of working for the department for almost 30 years. And although I may be familiar with many of the topics we bring to you, I have invited experts in those fields to help us dispel the myths and misconceptions that can often be barriers to our work. Join us as we open our doors and invite you to have a seat at our table. Hi, Skye. Thank you so much for being on the set of Doors to Hope and Healing. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today. So we invited you on to talk about the work that you're doing at DCF, because this show is really to help our viewers and our community understand the many facets of work that's happening at the Department of Children and Families, and that we're not just a child placing agency. You know, we're doing a lot of things on the prevention end, and we'll get into Family First and all of that. But before we talk about your role in the Transitional Supports and Success Division, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Skye Garofalo. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm currently a program supervisor at DCF. I've been with the agency for 24 years. I started out as a case-carrying social worker, like most of us, doing all the different, disciplines, working with families with, children still in the home, working in response to reports to our care line in the intake department, working with children in foster care, working toward goals of reunification, adoption, and transfer of guardianship. I became a supervisor of a unit of case-carrying social workers. And then after a few years doing that, I moved on to working under our clinical program director in Region 3, which is sort of the eastern side of our state to the middle, working on helping move kids from congregate care settings to family settings using the team decision-making model. So we did that for some years and had a lot of success moving kids into families. And then I was a considered removal facilitator for about 3 years. So whenever we're, looking at the safety of children and we need to make a plan to ensure their safety and considering removal from the home, we bring the family and providers in and have a conversation and make a safe plan for the child, which could include removal from home if necessary, and looking, of course, at relatives and supports to care for the children. So after that, I moved on to become a program supervisor, again, overseeing cases and case decisions, around legal decisions and things like that. So I did that for around 6 years, and then a year ago I moved to the Transitional Supports and Success Division, where I am now, overseeing the congregate care settings. So our residential treatment centers, our therapeutic group homes, our youth star shelters, and our independent living programs.
So for our viewers who are watching who may not be familiar with what a congregate setting is, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, some of our children have needs that cannot be met in family settings. So they need treatment or stabilization. So this is, 24-hour shift care. There's always someone there supervising and supporting them emotionally.
And what about the STAR programs? What is this?
The STAR programs are really the youth shelters. So when we have a youth that's, maybe just come into foster care, or they've disrupted from a family setting and they need help and support and stabilization, they'll go to these settings. Usually it's for 30 days or longer before they can move on to either a higher level of care, like, a group home or something like that, or back into a family setting or, foster family.
And residential treatment facilities are the same, with the goal of getting that child to live back with a family?
Yes. Yes, okay. Exactly.
So that's great. So last April, I had welcomed one of your colleagues on, Ted Sanford, and he talked to us about the quality parenting centers, which were the centers where the children were visiting with their families, and which are a great new initiative that DCF is doing. Can you talk to our viewers about the work that we're doing with Family First?
Sure. So Family First Prevention and Services Act is federal legislation that went into effect in 2018. And it's one of the biggest pieces of, child welfare legislation since the Adoption and Safe Families Act many, many years ago. Child welfare services are subsidized by the federal government. So what this act does is it changes how states can receive funding for child welfare services. So not just for foster care, but for prevention services. So whenever a child's at risk of, entering foster care or, at high risk of abuse or neglect, they are eligible for prevention services. So this is basically mental health services, substance abuse services, and in-home parenting services. So the other caveat with this is that in order for the federal government to reimburse for these services, they must be evidence-based. So they have to be certain types of services where there's been research and that they've been found to be effective, which is really a good thing, for children across the country.
Yeah.
So that's one part of Family First. And the other part is around children that are in non-family settings. So qualified residential treatment programs is what are now in the state of Connecticut, are therapeutic foster homes and residential treatment centers. So in order for Connecticut and all other states to be able to receive money from the federal government to support these settings, they have to meet certain criteria. So they have to be licensed, they have to be accredited, they have to have a nursing and psychiatric services available to the youth. They need to use a trauma model. There's also other requirements from Family First related to these children entering these settings. We want all children that can live with families to be with families because we know kids do best, coming from those supportive relationships and homes. So with this, before a child is approved to enter one of these settings, we have to pull in the whole family. So having that child and family team meeting, getting the input from people that are close to the child and care about the child. So that's right in the federal legislation as a requirement. And also there's court oversight now. So for every child that is entering one of these qualified residential treatment programs, the court has to actually review that and approve whether they agree that the child needs that level of care. We're also looking for, children's stays in these settings to really be treatment oriented and short in nature, again, to get them back to that family setting as soon as possible.
Does the court oversight, do they follow that case throughout the duration of that child being in residential, or is it just at the onset of admission into that residential?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so at the onset, so these are all, children in foster care, and then all children in foster care have a yearly permanency plan review hearing. So in conjunction with that hearing, there's also going to be a QRTP, that's short for that, review. So every year it's going to be reviewed if that child remains in that setting. So again, the court is going to weigh in.
So the child isn't there unnecessarily a long time. So when we talk about the prevention work, the first part of the Family First Act that we talked about, when you talk about prevention and providing that money, the federal dollars to support these children at the front end, the prevention end, are those children's cases open with DCF? Does that family have an open case? Is that how we're identifying the prevention work?
Yes, these are all families that have open cases, and usually there would be like a case plan, like once the decision is made to open it, and that is also considered a prevention plan, which is a requirement for part of Family First, having these certain services and then being in that prevention plan.
So now that the QRTP has been implemented in our state of Connecticut, can you talk with us? We have plenty of time left in this segment about the initial feedback on how it's going. I know that other states as well are doing Family First. How has it been going so far?
Sure. Well, the other significant changes, other than the family team meeting and the court oversight, is that there are now new types of services that youth in those settings are getting. One being family engagement. So these programs are now required to engage those families and those family members and keep that team going. A lot of times kids that are in these settings, their relationships have broken down. It could be sometimes because of their behaviors, they are having trauma responses, and, things have happened within the family system, and, people grow apart. So we have to bring them back together. We want to try to repair those relationships, surround that child with love and support of their family.
How are you doing that? What are some examples of how we're engaging the family?
Yep. So, I talked about the child and family team meeting required before we enter. So the idea is to keep that going throughout the entire life of the case. The department's just rolling out updated permanency teaming training for our staff. We're also working on permanency teaming facilitation for our congregate care providers. So they don't have to rely on, the DCF social worker being the one to organize that they can help. They can co-facilitate those meetings. They can help with some of that outreach, because it is time consuming, finding people that, have lost touch. They may have moved, keeping in touch by phone, by email, and being really, planful and coordinated to make sure that these meetings can happen.
And are they, when you talk about people losing touch or not being where you last had seen them, are these people that the children have identified as key figures in their life that they want to stay connected with?
So it's both. Because the child may not recall, some of the people that they were connected with, or it could be someone that they didn't even really know. But through, case mining and the social worker reading through, history, and talking to family members, a lot of times that's the way that it happens. You can find that one, grandparent or aunt who can connect you to all these other people, to really bring the people in for support.
And for our viewers who are watching who may not be familiar with what case mining is, can you explain case mining a little bit?
Sure. It's, going through DCF history. A lot of times we'll have open cases for periods of time. And, when the case comes, the social worker may not be reading something from 10 years ago, but it may be really relevant, and there may be somebody that had been there for that child or that family that you can, again, approach. Also foster families, like if the child was in care in the past, reaching back out to, caregivers that they had who may want to be a support.
So even if maybe there was a school teacher at some point in that child's life who had really taken an active role, we might be able to go back and include them in on that plan.
Absolutely. Coaches, it's wide open, whoever can support the child in a positive way.
Yeah.
And then the other part is the aftercare. So this is the other new component of the qualified residential treatment programs, is when you discharge now, the programs have to provide up to 6 months of aftercare services. So, this is great. And the idea is to help support that child as they transition to the family setting, right? But it's also, if they transition to another congregate care setting, for collaboration, making sure that the goals we were working on here and the progress that we've made here is continuing in that next setting. And we have, clinicians that have gone out, after the child is discharged, meeting with the family, they're calling, they're supporting the child. And it's great because before it was sort of like, I think residential treatment was sort of in a bubble, if there was some contact after, it was sort of like, is this okay? I think, the idea is that people really care about these kids, in a lot of instances, they become like their family, because some of the stays can be quite long. So that's another loss, for the child, and for those staff caregivers. So, we're definitely hearing, some initial success stories. I heard one youth, after he discharged, he was calling the group home every day just to check in. He missed the staff, and to just hear those stories, it's wonderful.
And that it's okay, that he has permission to do that.
Exactly.
And it's not seen as unhealthy for him. And when you talk about the support services that are offered after they transition out into their new home, so if they went back home, what type of services, by example, would a residential facility offer to a child who's transitioned home? Does that child go back to the residential facility or are in-home services?
So it can really be anything, There should be some sort of community service. The aftercare service this is not the only service. So there could be, family counseling at a local counseling agency. There could be other in-home programs that the department has put in place, with foster care. If it's, functional family therapy, foster care, there's a therapist that's assigned. So some of this is just collaborative. But if there's a gap in treatment, that QRTP can step in, to help for short periods of time. And, it's not necessarily even the clinician that's doing all the aftercare work. It can be a direct care staff who maybe was the person that was closest to the youth during the time that they were, in the QRTP. So, each aftercare plan is specific to the youth, where they're discharging to, what that youth's needs are, what the family's needs are, so it can really be tailored to them.
So what else is your division doing? I'm sure so much work is being done, but I'm sure that there's so much more that we probably wouldn't even have time for. But can you talk a little bit about what else you're doing in the TSS division?
Sure. Yeah. The TSS division is really, focused on our adolescent population, 13 and above, and our young adults. The goal, obviously, we want to prepare these young people for successful, adulthood. And we have lots of different, programming that we cover around like life skills. We want to make sure that kids know how to manage their money, understand nutrition, can cook, things like that. We have a youth advisory board that's under us, where we have children, who are teens, who are in foster care, and they can come to these meetings. They can meet directly with the commissioner. They can have a voice in policy and practice decisions. So that's also under our division. We have also a wilderness school, which is unique to Connecticut, so it's sort of like a camp where kids, not just kids in foster care, we also, just families that we're involved with, teenagers can go for this, for anything from like a 1-day experience to like a 2-week, camping excursion. So that's within our division too. We have an LGBTQ mentoring program that's just recently started. Let me see here. And obviously the congregate cares, I've just talked about that. That's a big part of
When
that.
you talk about life skills, which are so important, and I think we all take that for granted, that you don't know something unless it's been mirrored or taught to you. What are some ways in which the children, our youth, the adolescents, 13 to 18, are able to tap into learning about life skills?
Yep. So within the congregate care settings, there's the staff are trained. So we currently use list assessment, life skills inventory assessment, and then they can be really planful about making sure that the youth has all these different areas mastered, sort of like before they move on, or when they move on to a different setting, where they are and what they still need to accomplish. So they do experiential learning with this, like hands-on, they're going to the grocery store, they're, watching them, handle money, and, really just showing that they have to demonstrate that they've mastered the skills.
Yeah, and they'll be so much stronger and prepared for the real world once that they do. And then the Youth Advisory Board. How does a youth become involved with the Youth Advisory Board? Do they have to be elected to that role, or just express interest?
So usually it's through their social worker. Most of the teens are connected with an adolescent specialist social worker, and many of them are involved with the Youth Advisory Board. So, the youth have strong relationships with their social workers, and they'll, offer it to the youth, and sometimes they'll give it a try. We have different, other programming that, are similar related. They could try this out, and they might, go to the Youth Advisory Board next.
It's been a privilege to have a few of the Youth Advisory Board youth on the show, and talking about, just how empowered they feel to be able to have a voice to express ways that they wish things were different, or ways that they want, other youth who are going to be coming in behind them to benefit from their voice, and talking about ways that they wish that our system would improve. And as you know, because you've been there for a long time, like I have, we've evolved, and we're changing, and we've become, such a strong system, such a strong child welfare system. This question we hadn't talked about before the show, but if you were to envision the TSS division, envision that division in 5 years, what would be that there's no perfect world, I know, but how could you envision things being, strengthened over the next 5 years?
Yep. I think, moving as many kids as we can to family settings is really our goal, because we do see that as the path to success. Definitely we want to support these kids when they have these treatment needs for these short periods. But again, back to those family and support systems, because like I was talking about, that relationship with the social worker, very strong, but that's not a lifelong relationship, so we really want to make sure that kids have those stable relationships when they're ready to exit from, our care. We in Connecticut are doing great with this, I think, some of the other jurisdictions talk about, 30% of their kids 12 and over, in congregate care settings. I mean, we're at 6%,
wow.
And we
are
have
we down that low at 6%? Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful.
And, our placement with relative and kin, we're right around 50, so we've been, working on these goals for many years and, chipping away at it to, be one of the model, child welfare agencies that we are here in Connecticut.
Well, it's an honor to be a part of that child welfare system. I'm sure that you feel the same way that I do. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close our show today?
A couple other things happening, in the TSS division. We are working with having restorative justice practices come into specifically our STAR shelters. So working with CCA, the Center for Children's Advocacy, one of our nonprofit law firms, and the Center for Restorative Justice. And we have a consultant going out and doing circles with youth. And the idea is, if harm has occurred, having these circles and making a plan how to address, and repair that harm. And the same goes for relationships, like I was talking about how youth, they lose these relationships. So having those same restorative justice practices used with the families, to strengthen those relationships. We're also just starting to talk about developing an arts council for youth. So that's something on the horizon. It's just in the very beginning stages, but there's a call for a mural at one of our settings. So, that kind of brought us to think about, how can we capitalize on, these strengths and all this creativity that our young people have. So we're looking at, not just, visual arts, but, poetry, music, spoken word, really just celebrating everything our youth have to offer.
I'm excited about that because I get to be a part of that. So I mean, we have such talented youth in our programs, and I've had the chance to see and meet with the art teacher at one of our facilities at Solnit, and the amount of artwork that those children have created, and just the talent that they have in their expression, and how therapeutic art can be for these kids it's powerful, and it's just another way for them to be able to have that outlet, have that way to communicate and express themselves. So I'm excited that we're going in that way. The mural that's being requested, is it an outside mural, inside mural?
I believe it's inside. I haven't been to the site, but I guess it's a pretty big space. So I'm already trying to think about that. We use a projector. I think that might be the way to do it, get the kids up there.
That's exciting. That's exciting. So, but thank you so much, Skye, for being on. We'll definitely have you come back as all these programs and the family first work continues and becomes strengthened over the course of the next several months. But thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching Doors to Hope and Healing. Now I ask you to watch a story of one of our teens who's looking for their forever home. Thank you.
Being a teen is tough. But for teens in foster care, not knowing what comes next, their world can feel upside down. And they need you to help turn it around. Provide support, stability, hope, and right their world. Learn how you can foster a teen.
The Saybrook Fish House in Canton has been serving fresh seafood, chicken, and steak entrees for 34 years, offering 3 cozy dining room settings, a newly renovated pub with craft beer, wine by the glass, specialty cocktails, and a lighter fare menu. Open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week. Reservations accepted for parties of 2 to 42, and gift certificates are also available. The Saybrook Fish House, nestled at the crossroads of Route 44, 202, and 179 in Canton.